Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to introduce your presenter. Jackie Bennett is the Director of Accreditation for Africa and Asia with Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. Jackie, you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Robin. The GFAS certification program is available to qualified animal sanctuaries, rescues, and wildlife rehabilitation and release centers. In our previous webinar, I talked about how our written GFAS standards cover topics that promote excellence in humane animal care. Additionally, there are standards addressing areas of safety and security that apply to both verified and accredited facilities. This includes safety for your animals, for your staff and volunteers, for the visiting public, and for the facilities themselves. These GFAS standards cover the following general areas: overall facility safety, security of your animal enclosures and the perimeter, staffing considerations, security and emergency coverage, record maintenance, animal transport, staff safety, and emergency response for both disaster and escape plans and training. Here's the language of our standard on general facility safety. Premises, including buildings and grounds, are kept clean and in good repair in order to protect employees, volunteers, visitors, and animals from injury and to facilitate appropriate animal care. For example, are equipment and hazardous materials stored safely when not in use? Are you taking steps to prevent injuries? In some cases, there may be laws or regulations, such as OSHA in the United States, that apply, and our standards also note that you should comply with those requirements. Securing your facilities is always important. We look at both enclosure security and the security of the facility itself. What may be appropriate in your facility depends in part on the species in your care and the individual animals. Good practices include limited access by senior staff to the keys for enclosures that house dangerous animals, such as apes or big cats, and signage to warn of dangerous animals or those with a particular injury or disease. The GFAS standards also address securing your perimeter to prevent trespassers and at times to keep other animals from entering the grounds. Generally, this would be done by having a perimeter fence, but we also look at other security measures and the conditions surrounding your facility, such as a natural boundary like water. The GFAS standards do address staffing, but only to ensure that you have a sufficient number of staff to provide an appropriate level of care to your animals, and that everyone's job duties are understood. This would include volunteers as well, who should be trained and supervised when working near the animals. We are not seeking to be intrusive or to manage your facility, and your executive director or other managers are in the best position to assess your staff and determine what you need. We will ask who is available to respond to an emergency, even if it is after hours. If your sanctuary director or other staff live on grounds, that's one way to ensure that someone is always on call. But not all facilities have this, we know. Some have overnight staff shifts, others have an overnight security guard. So there are several ways to meet this standard. We also like to hear how veterinary emergencies are addressed. Not every sanctuary or rescue center has a veterinarian on staff. Some will have a veterinary nurse or technician, or a veterinary office within a relatively short drive, or someone who can be reached by phone. All of those can be ways to meet the standard. It's important to keep and maintain adequate records. This is true both for animal care records and for other facility records, such as the acquisition documents for animals when they are first brought in, and other official documents. Our standards describe some records that you should keep, but there may be others required by your national and local laws. Ideally, you will have a way of backing up records so the information is not lost if there's a fire or other catastrophic event. Animal transport is also covered in the standards. Once an animal arrives at your facility, it may not need transport again except for medical reasons or as part of a release or reintroduction program. But our standard addresses doing a transport safely and in compliance with applicable laws. Our standards address some other aspects of staff safety, and a few of those are listed here. For example, your protocols may include instructions for staff activity around animal areas, such as who has access to the keys for enclosures, requirements that staff work in pairs when working near dangerous animals, and having appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE, when working with animals or with cleaning supplies. PPE may include gloves, goggles, and masks, and will in part depend on the species in your care and what risks of disease transmission are present. Having an adequate communication system is also important. In a very small facility, you may not need much if everyone is only a shout away. But in large facilities, systems such as two-way radios or cell phones should be used so that all staff can be reached to notify of an emergency or just to reach someone if needed. We don't require any specific system as long as it's reliable. Here are a few other areas of staff safety that the GFAS standards address. First, you may not have firearms on your premises, but if you do, then we want to make sure some precautions are in place so only authorized staff can access and use them, and that they're stored safely. Equipment and drugs used for chemical restraint of animals should also be stored properly with access limited to those trained and allowed to use them. The same is true for controlled drugs, for which there should be limited access, following any laws that might apply. And there should be a basic first aid policy so staff knows what to do in case of an injury. It's a good practice to have first aid kits available in one or more locations, such as a veterinary clinic or a staff house, and check regularly to make sure that they're being kept fully stocked. Finally, depending on the animals in your facility, staff should be aware of the potential for zoonotic disease transmission. Again, use of PPE is one way to prevent this, but schedules for regular TB testing and other health screenings for staff may be advisable. It's good to have a veterinary input on what steps your facility should be taking. We want all facilities to have emergency response plans in place to know what to do in case of events such as fire, injury, or natural disaster. What you need to include in that plan will depend on the specifics of your facility, including the size, the layout, and the animals. But in all cases, consider the following. It's good to have fire prevention measures in place, including fire extinguishers in buildings. In some instances, a fire alarm system may be needed in buildings where animals are housed if those buildings aren't being staffed at all times. Items like hay, blankets, and other bedding materials ideally shouldn't be stored in large quantities in barns or other animal enclosures. You'll want to make sure your staff and any on-site volunteers are aware of the emergency plans. So you might post maps or signs on bulletin boards to show evacuation routes or places where staff should go to be safe. Doing a safety drill a few times a year will make sure they remember what to do. You might want to let your local authorities know about your plans if possible. Some centers will invite the authorities, such as police or fire departments, to their facility to get their input on things to do in an emergency and to make sure those agencies are familiar with your center's layout. And based on input, revise your plans when needed. We recommend reviewing all policies and manuals at least annually just to make sure everything is up to date. These same considerations would apply for escaped animal protocols. Again, your protocol will be different based on your facility and the species in your care. We don't want any animal to escape, but when working with dangerous animals, we also want to prevent an injury to staff and visitors as well. A protocol ideally includes information on who gets contacted, how staff is notified, and plans for safety routes if needed. Doing an escape drill with your staff is important not only for training, but also to get feedback and to revise the plan if needed. It's also a good practice to keep a record of when an escape occurs, so that the cause of the escape can be addressed and remedied. And that concludes our overview of the GFAS standards covering security and safety. You can find all of our standards on our website at the following link. And please feel free to contact us if you have any questions about our standards or the application process. Thank you.